While editing the touching shame video, it seemed to make sense to make it into two different parts, mainly because the intensity of the secondary line of inquiry seems to almost fit within its own video, yet it is so closely tied to this other form of inquiry, it makes sense to have them somewhat included. So what you are about to watch is part 1, and part 2 will be released shortly. We've really had some wonderful and insightful conversations on the posting page for the YouTube channel. The question was, what practical things in life seem to be hardest to let go? And some of these questions oriented around shame. And this particular video will look at shame in a way that isn't just conceptual or intellectual. It seems like we all have a relationship with shame. It seems to be the primary driver of identity. It is the very thing that creates a sense of rupture or separation from our truest nature. And even if we have an intellectual understanding of shame, sometimes it can be very difficult to come in contact with what that feels like, what kind of sensation is kind of pervading every experience. In this video, we're going to explore some inquiry questions and some other very basic techniques to come in contact with shame. And so there is a little bit of a disclaimer here. The closer we get to shame, the more destabilized we can be. So please start with the initial inquiry questions, and as we go deeper, make sure that you have a backup plan in case things get too intense. Make sure you have a friend nearby, someone you can call, the willingness to walk to a neighbor's house. And more than anything, just remember, there is never any time that anything has to be done with what we're feeling. No matter how intense the feeling is, you don't have to do anything. Please, take care of yourself and be as gentle as possible while exploring this particular subject, this particular aspect of this path. So when we're younger, we seem to be really connected to reality as it is. We don't think about what's coming. We don't think about what's happened. And then something comes along and hurts. It can be traumatic or otherwise. It doesn't really matter because it's so relative. In that moment, the one who protects is formed. This is the first wound. This is the first and most primitive belief. This is the rupture that creates a sense of identity. And from there, it seems that every human being on this planet develops some sort of belief about self. It turns inward. And that belief seems to be something along these lines. I am broken. I'm not good enough. Something is wrong with me. I can't do this alone. I'm unloved and unlovable, and a myriad of other statements. The statement itself isn't very important. That's just content. Here we want to become a little bit more experiential. We want to get right to the feeling of it. So even if a statement does arise and you are quite aware of what that statement is, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be focused on that particular area of content. Those thoughts themselves tend to be the driver. And soon, if we sit with this long enough, we can begin to see that pretty much every action we've ever taken has been a form of compensation for this primary or fundamental belief about self. The fact that we are lacking makes us want to move out into the world to find something that will make us whole. And as we've spoken about before, to find something out there to make me whole doesn't change the belief that there is something here that is broken. This can also look in a different way. Sometimes we look out at this reality, this nature, this universe, and we are pointing at everything else that seems broken in a critical way. If we sit with this long enough and we become still, we see that that is actually still pointing inward. And the statement we seem to be making there is something along the lines of, I am not good enough to be with all of this as it is. See if you can give yourself an opportunity to take some time. Go to your room. Make sure it's comfortable. Make sure the shades are drawn and it's dimly lit. And make sure you have some water nearby. Here we're going to start asking some inquiry questions and immediately moving into the sensational space. This can be pretty intense. So just be prepared to feel some things that you might not want to feel. This can help us get into contact with any sort of shame or self-worth on a very visceral experiential level. And there's a lot of value to this because it can cut through quite a bit of the layers of our onion as we peel this all away. This will also demonstrate something about our truest nature, that there is an aspect of courage here that is not perturbed. It cannot have an opposite. As you begin kind of walking down this path, you will see how strong and resilient you are at your most fundamental layer. This can be useful in terms of cultivating this sense of self-trust, which is a bit of a misnomer. Self-trust is really just simply trusting all of this as it is. Find yourself a nice, comfortable space. Make sure it's dimly lit, it's quiet and secluded, so that you feel like you can step into these sensations in the body in a very, very direct way. And begin to ask yourself some of these inquiry questions. Ask yourself, what is it about me that makes me broken? And sit with that for a little bit. It's okay if thoughts come up. They're likely to come up. And see, as these thoughts begin to arise, if you can point to them and return to the sensational space. Where do you feel the sensation? Is it in your solar plexus? Maybe it's a tightness in your throat or a tightness in the chest. For a lot of us, it can be a lot deeper, right beneath the navel. Sit with that sensation for a while and continue pondering the question, what is it about me that makes me broken? You can modify that a little bit as well. Why am I so broken? How am I so broken? And here we're not attempting to affirm any type of truth or belief. We're utilizing a belief that may be there to see if there is a sensation that is habitually avoided. And just allow yourself to feel into that. Now, throughout this process, if tears seem to come, just let them come. It's pretty natural to cry through this. And if the tears do come, allow yourself to dig all the way in. In other words, cry as deeply as the crying wants to cry. It's okay. And remember to keep breathing. Not necessarily for relief, but it really does help with coming into contact with these sensations. And the next question you can ask yourself is, how do I know that there is something wrong with me? In what ways am I aware of the things that are wrong with me? Who has told me that there is something wrong with me? Ask yourself a series of these questions associated with something being wrong and continue feeling into that emotional space. And keep this close. We're not intending to manufacture these feelings. We are simply asking these questions to see if there's any sensations that arise. As you feel through this, you can ask yourself this question. When did I first recognize that I am not good enough? And this might require a little bit of memory exploration, but that's okay. See if you can just make a quick index of memories as a kid and see if you can see those moments where you recognize that there was something wrong, where you recognize that you're not good enough, that something is inherently not whole. Same thing. Explore that question and see what comes up. It will require a certain amount of vulnerability here to tap in, yet it's likely to bring up something very visceral. So allow that to wash over the body. And as before, if it brings tears, let the tears come. Some of us may have a protection response, which is also fairly normal. So if some sort of frustration or anger arises, it's okay to step into that sensation and just remind yourself, I don't have to do anything. I can just feel. How deeply can you feel these things? Can you allow the sensation to wash over the entire sensational space? Can you pay attention to the thoughts that may be attempting to distract you from feeling into this fundamental shame? Dig in a little. As you sit with this a little bit, ask yourself, what are all the ways that I am unloved? What are all the ways that I am unlovable? And to sit with that again as the sensations arise, keep allowing this sense of shame to come to the surface. Here, the point is not to reject what we are feeling, not to reject this fundamental belief that tends to haunt us. It is more to entertain these sensations and to pay attention to the thoughts that are arising. What thoughts are labeling these sensations? What thoughts are orienting themselves to the way that we feel? This is a two-pronged approach. Feel, notice thoughts. Let every thought be a cue to move back to feeling. And you may find that this will get you into some pretty deep, intense emotion. Sometimes when we have sessions, people will say, I have a difficult time crying. And this is because we've become so accustomed to avoiding that which is uncomfortable that we seem to have some really quick intellectual blocks that prevent us from going any further into the sensation. And it can feel like you get stuck. It can get stuck in the throat, the chest, the solar plexus. If we begin to feel whatever this is all the way behind the navel, it will begin to reveal to us a lot more. Is it just pain? Is it just shame? Or is it simply just a sensation? Is it even worthy of avoiding? Are these thoughts even true? This is one aspect of listening to the whispers of thought that we usually don't pay attention to. Oftentimes, this kind of inquiry will really bring those to the surface. As you sit with this a little further, you can ask, when will I know that I have fully proven my worth? At what point in my life, accomplishing what tasks and what achievements, will I know that I have proven my worth? This one can be good for those who are really oriented around proving how good they are. Another form of compensation that tends to be deeply oriented around shame. What do I actually have to do to prove how good I am? And this might have an external value. This may have something to do with a parent, or this may have something to do with ourselves. Really settle with that. Maybe the ideas come up in certain thoughts, but keep in mind, we're just noticing thoughts. We're just pointing to that fish and we're returning to the sensation. Here, in this space, we don't have to avoid that which we feel. We don't have to avoid these things that we habitually resist and avoid. Further, we can ask, what has to happen before I can recognize that everything is elementally and fundamentally okay? What things need to be accomplished before I can realize that everything is just perfect the way it is? As you explore this a little further, same practice. Get into the sensations.